Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz from the Two Man Power Trip, and of course, joining me is my co-host, Mr. Trump Mania himself, the Wizard, Mr. Lavi Margolin. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. On episode 99, Double Nines, we have a very special guest, a very special episode today. Keith Elliott Greenberg, who I'm sure all of our listeners are very familiar with, given his big body of work as a historian, certainly an author. I love wrestling books, have always consumed them, especially from the early 2000s on when it was a little bit more manageable. But, seeing Keith's name, regularly on the bookshelves, it's like an exciting moment for me to connect in this way. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thank you, guys.
So, Keith, I know we talked not that long ago, but how's everything going? How was the book launch? I know you were doing a couple book launch. I know you were in Brooklyn. You were in a couple places.
Yeah, I was in the UK last week when I think we spoke while I was in the UK, and then I did my official New York City book launch in Brooklyn, and that was great. It brought out a lot of people from different walks of my life, and it brought out some very enthusiastic people who seemed excited about reading the book. How they'll feel after they've read it, time will tell.
How do those book launches go? Like what do you do? You just kind of make a little speech to everybody, and they all get in
I didn't
line,
even
and
make a speech this time. I used it as a social event. There were about 100 people there.
oh
It's in a
wow,
place called Lucky 13, which is known as New York's only heavy metal bikini bar. So there were, dancers on poles, and I was had a table with books, and there was a big area where bands normally play, and people just socialized and talked and bought books.
nice, cool. I'm sure Lavi's familiar with Lucky 13. He's from that area. He's kind of in that neighborhood.
Once I go off the grid in Manhattan, I'm totally lost. So I probably need my phone to find my way.
So, how's the reaction been to the book so far?
I mean, it's hard to tell because um, it's early. People are just receiving the book. Uh, the folks who've corresponded with me who've started reading the book seem to like it. But again, those are the folks who are writing to me personally. No one is writing to me personally and saying, I hate this book and I hate you. Not yet, anyway.
Has that happened before? That sounds like a crazy thing to happen.
I remember getting some very negative. When I did the John Lennon book in 2010, I wrote a book about the death of John Lennon. And there were people who were so inside in their knowledge. They were like, why'd you even put this in the book? I knew this anyway. So it would be as if, I wrote a book about the history of professional wrestling and mentioned World of Sport in the UK, and there were people saying, "I know all about the UK. Why are you telling me this? This isn't knowledge to me."
You know, it's crazy. My mom has that book. I for some reason I didn't equate you because I'm thinking of you with wrestling, and the John Lennon book. That's so weird. Oh my god, duh. Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, yeah. You
that's
try to keep
interesting.
look if you're a professional writer, you try to be eclectic, versatile,
Think of the Beatles, wrestling, Beatlemania, WrestleMania. It kind of
and
kind of goes
there's
in a
a
little bit.
connection, as you know. It was Howard Finkel derived the name WrestleMania based on Beatlemania.
Yeah, so there's a little connection there, and
Little
obviously John Lennon has like the charisma of a pro wrestler, or had the charisma of a pro wrestler.
Certainly, but I don't think those guys grew up watching pro wrestling, unlike
No,
other entertainers. Like Prince, I know, grew up as a fan of the AWA and used to do imitations of the Crusher, supposedly. Bob Dylan has alluded to professional wrestling, although I doubt he was a week to week fan, but he mentions Gorgeous George in his autobiography. Whether the tale about seeing Gorgeous George in person actually occurred, I'm not sure.
Andy Kaufman. I know not a trained singer, but he did a lot of singing.
Yes,
Loved
he
Buddy
did.
Rogers. Loved the original Nature
He
Boy.
did. He did. And Nat King Cole and Buddy Rogers. Someone had told me that there was I know there's a photo of Nat King Cole and Buddy Rogers somewhere. Someone said there was a clip of Nat King Cole singing Nature Boy with Buddy Rogers standing there. I'm not so sure that's true.
I want it to be true, but yeah, I don't know if that's
I
actually.
think we would have seen it.
Right, definitely. So, anything surprised you so far about the book?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, it's by and large getting the reaction that I was anticipating. Some folks don't like the political sections of the book because I juxtapose what was going on in the real world and what was going on in professional wrestling. There are people who say, I didn't want to read about politics. I want to read about wrestling. Some people have accused me of having a bias, a partisan bias, and they didn't like reading the book. I also write about Brexit, and somebody wrote, why was Brexit in the book? And, I can't satisfy everybody, but I stand by my choice to write the book the way it's written.
Like, as far as just like the book in general and the process of writing it, what was it like as the pandemic's going on as you're writing it? I mean, that's a different process, I'm sure, than you've had to deal with before.
Well, yeah, because generally I organize a book and before I start writing, because I don't want to get lost while I'm writing the book. And if it's not organized, you're going to be going down certain paths that aren't getting you anywhere. You have to come back to where you need to be. In this case, and there was an outline, but history was unfolding both in the world and in professional wrestling. And I was writing as things were occurring, or sometimes I would start to write and then things would shift. I remember, the wrestling, the WWE being in a dark performance center, but then the Thunderdome came to pass. So that stuff had to be added, or you couldn't say for the entire pandemic, WWE broadcasted shows pre-taped from a dark performance center. Yeah, everything was changing and people's repertoires were changing. And I was on Busted Open Radio earlier this week, and Mickey James is one of the rotating hosts. And she said, without having the fans to feed off, she began working more in ring and telling a story that way. And she thinks that's endured into the so-called post-pandemic era.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that affects everybody, I guess, but even you writing it, it affected you because it's different than what you're normally used to doing.
Yes, very much so. I mean, especially, well, even the indie wrestling book, like I knew, it culminated with the creation of AEW Dynamite. And for those who don't know, my last book was Too Sweet Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution. But all of the indie wrestling history that led up to the creation of AEW, I could outline and write, and things weren't going to dramatically change. It was just the end of the book, when we leading up to the creation of AEW and the first Dynamite that, I had to work on. So that wasn't that bad of a challenge.
Now, Lavi, I know you're chomping at the bit. You got a ton of questions for Keith.
Sure. So, actually, one of our most prolific guests on the show is Brett Lauderdale of Game Changer Wrestling, GCW. Right. And although John and I don't watch GCW on a week-to-week or show-to-show basis, based on our podcast, we've really been following it closely from a business perspective. So how long has GCW been on your radar? And, when it came on your radar, what sort of brought it there? What unique qualities did you notice?
Well, Joey Janela had been on my radar before I was aware of really what GCW was and what kind of a cult following it had. And I was starting to research my indie wrestling book. And I went to a show in Queens that I think Brett Lauderdale had the promoter's license for that show, but it was another promotion. It was actually a promotion run by Jack Sabbath, who owns the Wrestling Universe merchandise store. And I'm doing a signing there on Saturday, October 15th. And so I had met Janella already. And then I was at this show, and Janella introduced me to Brett Lauderdale. And Lauderdale essentially explained to me the evolution of GCW. And once I went to a few GCW shows, and back then they really were pretty much New Jersey based shows, I realized this is really a cult following here. This is a real movement. I'm not sure if I was aware of how much it would transform professional wrestling, but I do think GCW has had an impact everywhere. Now, as we speak, they're in Mexico. They were just recently in Japan. They were recently in the UK. So they're bringing that style around the world, and they're also incorporating the styles of the places they visit. So and they're already putting on lucha shows or lucha matches and Japanese strong style type matches. So I guess I became aware of GCW as I was researching the book on the indie wrestling revolution.
Why do you think they were so adept at building their brand during the pandemic? Is it because they didn't go dark for long and just kept figuring out ways to keep going, or there was something else?
I mean, I think you answered the question, but I think there's a certain moxie that they have, and that's always been evident. The same way they would, have crazy deathmatch shows, and they didn't really care what proper wrestling fans, if there is such a term, thought of that. They were willing to take risks during the pandemic. Now, they weren't taking reckless health risks. At their shows, people were told to be masked. People checked on whether you were masked or not at some shows I'd been to. There were sanitizing stations. The wrestlers had their temperatures taken. It wasn't like I contrast them in the book to another promotion that was having indoor shows with people tightly packed together before there were even vaccines. They were not being dangerous. In fact, they were having outdoor shows that were very comfortable to attend because you could spread out. They were doing shows in a park in Indianapolis. You could spread out because you were supposed to socially distance. So it was a very agreeable experience. And the announcer would acknowledge the pandemic before the show began and urge fans to be safe. And so they were tackling the issues of the day. They weren't running away from them. And look, they also did that social distancing match between Joey Janela and Jimmy Lloyd, which was a comedy match. And that's when everyone really was locked down. So they were making fun of the pandemic at a point when people were really scared of the virus. And, that I think that's a statement about Brett Lauderdale, that Brett Lauderdale has a certain attitude. You talk about eras in wrestling, his attitude is every bit as freewheeling as what you saw in ECW or later on the WWE Attitude Era. And I think, a lot of their success is their creative success.
Now, of course, as I had written in my book review, and we chatted a little bit online, I was a little bit shy to come over, but I did see you at the Hammerstein Ballroom show. It ended up you were taking notes for an article that you were doing. But being in attendance and absorbing that show and comparing it to what you saw before and sort of GCW as it's grown after, Do you think that was their peak in the mainstream, or was
We
that
don't
just
know.
a
We don't know. It's too
yeah,
early. Look, they're in Mexico now. They were in Japan. They went over and they did, a number of shows with TNT in Liverpool. So I would say they're still expanding. I don't think that's their peak and then it's the decline. And I mention this a lot when I'm interviewed because people ask me about, how I got involved with WWE. And I was writing about wrestling beforehand. But I remember being at the first WrestleMania and having a chat with the editor of the WWF magazine at the time, Ed Raschuti, who has since become a very good friend. And Ed was about 20 years older than me. And he said, and we were just speculating about the WrestleMania and how long it'll last. And both of us pretty much regarded it as a fad, the rock and wrestling connection. And Ed said, I'm thinking, there'll be a WrestleMania 2, one more year for it to go up. Then there'll be a WrestleMania 3, but by then, it'll be on the decline. The attendance won't be as good. And then, it'll just kind of dissipate. Neither of us could project what was going to happen in the future. I'm not even sure Vince McMahon could completely project. I wonder if he even realized 2 years later he'd be selling out the Pontiac Silverdome. So was that GCW's peak? For their sake, I hope not, and I don't think it was.
amazing. Has Brett had a chance to check out the book that he's shared with you?
Brett, I sent Brett a PDF before the book was out. He's also on the mailing list to receive a book. I'm sure he's received it by now. He's a busy guy. I'm not sure if he's had the time to read it. I know he posted something about the book that was positive. So I don't know if that's based on what he's read or based on feedback others have given him or based on the friendship we've cultivated.
Great. So moving along to some of the other promotions that some say this period was a difficult one for them. So as we know, ROH was seemingly very cautious during this time. For a long time, they didn't tape any new content. When they did, it was empty arenas. And even curiously, after pay-per-views, then they would have empty tapings. Some people felt that this was the downfall of the promotion. Do you attribute it to that?
It certainly hurt the promotion because everybody else at that stage was they had fans in the arenas, whether those were full houses or not, that varied. When I was at WrestleMania 37, there were at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, I'd say there were probably 30,000 wooden cutouts of fans, but there were also live fans and you heard them. Ring of Honor's product, there was no Thunderdome. They were just empty arena matches. And I think that certainly hurt them once you could compare Ring of Honor to what else people could see. And by then, like GCW was doing outdoor shows. They never really stopped while others were being cautious. I also think, and I don't want to condemn anybody for being healthy, but Ring of Honor is owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, which had extremely strict protocols. So the wrestlers would have to quarantine in a room for more than a day before they could get in the ring. And I think cumulatively that hurt them. I think the NWA was also hurt. I mean, it's in the book. The NWA was hurt because they were gearing up for another Crockett Cup, and then suddenly everything was on hold. They lost talent. Ricky Starks was, I think, the NWA TV champion. Now AEW was there to attract those wrestlers who might not be getting as much work as they wanted to. If you were good enough at that stage, Tony Khan was extending his hand. They also used a lot of indie guys on their shows. And there's an irony there because Ring of Honor initially assisted assisted Cody Rhodes and the Bucks when they staged All In. And then ultimately that generosity worked against Ring of Honor because that led to the launch of AEW, and then AEW seems so much more dynamic than what that Ring of Honor product was offering, and they also lured away some of Ring of Honor's top talent. So, would they have ended up in serious straits anyway? I think they might have. And they also were not willing to spend the kind of money that others were spending. The NWA, now they're going back and resetting. And, they've been staging good shows, but I don't think they've regained the momentum that they had prior to the pandemic, despite them always producing a good product.
And I think that that makes a lot of sense with the NWA, and something similar that comes to mind, although it seems like ages ago, MLW had quite a bit of buzz for a while, even into the AEW era. Unique talent, unique matchups and perspectives, and so on. But they seemed to have lost a tremendous amount of the momentum coming out of the COVID era years later. So where do you think MLW stands today, and could they have done anything different?
I'm waiting to see that. I am going to make an observation, though, and this is something I've thought about privately. Because the so-called forbidden door has been breached, you don't have to go specifically to an MLW show to see talent that are in MLW. You can go to a GCW show during the pandemic when GCW was doing outdoor shows. I remember watching Calvin Tankman on a GCW show. Likewise, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, which is co-owned by Excalibur, the AEW announcer, that used to be the most unique wrestling arguably in the world. And now you can see these matchups on other indie shows, on GCW and other shows. John Moxley competes in GCW. So you have this combination of talent that's suddenly available, whereas in times past they were not. And I think that has impacted some of these promotions.
You've touched upon this a bit, but I've shared this theory with John for some time, that obviously AEW has had a huge impact on the business, full-time jobs, great salaries, exposure for many wrestlers. But it seems almost unavoidable that AEW has eaten some of the market, not only punching up at WWE, not to say punching down because they're not aggressive towards that.
They're not aggressively punching down, but I understand the parallel you're making.
Yeah. So do you think that there is room, GCW has done it from their niche very, very well, as we've talked about, but do you think that there's room for other buzzworthy promotions in that, not in that same way, but in the way that Beyond used to have, PWG used to have it, and so on?
I think there is. We just don't know what they're going to be. I mean, I was just in the UK. People were talking about Rev Pro shows. Is Rev Pro at the level it was a few years ago? Maybe not. But those British fans are still excited by Rev Pro. Insane Championship Wrestling in Scotland, when I was in Glasgow, people were talking about that. Again, it may not be at its peak. And maybe there's another Brett Lauderdale out there. All it takes is, moxie and innovation, creativity, and also a love of the business. And you never know what can happen.
Do you think that besides opening doors for with executives and TV stations and sponsors, like, I'm sure Billy Corgan can get a meeting, but to close a deal could be tough. What about like a Freddie Prinze Jr.? Or we've heard several famous
Look, I
rappers.
don't know. There's a fine line between someone who is really committed to being in the wrestling business and somebody who is a hobbyist. Uh, Tony Khan has proven he's no hobbyist. People might poke fun at him because he's very visible now, but he's invested in this, and I don't see him pulling out when things are tougher than they were before. I don't know what's in Freddie Prinze Jr.'s heart. I don't know if Freddie Prinze Jr. knows what's in his heart. There have been plenty of people over the years who've invested in wrestling promotions assuming that they were going to be successful and make money. And then when, things plummeted into the red, they backed out. So, time will tell.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to John.
With GCW, going back to that, do you like how they're going to have, some homegrown talents that either went to AEW and came back or are going to stick with them? Like you kind of make it saying about MLW, you can kind of see some of their guys elsewhere. Do you like having that, just like homegrown talent and having that them stay there?
I do like, I like that people can go from place to place. I don't like generally when people are restricted. I like that you can see these dream matchups. I'm a wrestling fan, so of course I want to see that. Look, I've been to Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in LA, and it was extremely exciting, and I'm sure when those shows are staged, they remain exciting. And if I was in LA this weekend and there was a PWG show, I would go to it. But I also like the idea of being in New York City and, there's an indie show somewhere and it has an impressive combination of talent. There's a promotion that runs in Jamaica, Queens. I think that's run by Amazing Red. And, Will Ospreay has appeared on those shows. That's like a little indie show. And arguably the best wrestler in the world is there. So I certainly don't want to say tie everyone up to exclusive contracts so fans like myself and everybody listening here can only see them in one place.
What do you think about Moxley maybe no longer appearing for GCW?
Well, we don't know that. That's only speculation. I will say this. I write for Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK, and I have observed Moxley pretty closely backstage at GCW shows, and he seems to be having a great time. He seems to love the fact that he's doing those shows. So we don't know. I mean, speculating on something that is in fact, I don't think serves us any good.
I do think it's funny that he keeps mentioning it on TV. He wants to go on vacation. He wants to take a vacation.
Right.
He got pulled out from his vacation. So I think that's funny. So we might not see him in GCW for a month or 2 months or whatever it is, but he might come back. But I think the guy needs a vacation maybe.
He does, but now his wife is, in AEW with him. So, maybe he was missing like the family time. I imagine they probably, well, they were in Toronto, so I imagine, they had childcare over there. Maybe, I mean, everyone deserves a vacation. Also, your body deserves the chance to heal. And I also think, and I've been discussing this, there's a pro wrestling theme bar in Brooklyn called DDT. And myself and the owner, Randy Tyson, talk about this. Maybe guys deserve to have some time off to connect with their families, to heal their bodies, and also to give the fans a break so the fans aren't burnt out on the talent they're seeing week after week. I mean, I can remember, late 90s, early 2000s being backstage and having a conversation with Pat Patterson, and Pat Patterson pointing at a tag team and saying, these guys are great, but we're just accustomed to seeing them doing the same thing every week. And so people stop caring. Whereas in the territory days, a successful unit could go elsewhere and then return even in a few months and they'd be fresh again.
Well said. Definitely. I agree. It definitely freshens them up and maybe even gets them healthy too.
Right, right. And those are important things. We're not living, hopefully, we're past the time when wrestlers were living notoriously destructive lifestyles. And so, rather than taking some kind of enhancement or some kind of deadener to ignore the pain, they do deserve to have something of an off season, not all the talent on the roster at the same time, but again, to take care of those other things in your life.
Keith, before we let you go, where can everybody find the book, see the book, read the book?
Well, as I said in another interview, it's not like the book is only being sold clandestinely. The book can be found anywhere where books are sold. You can, walk into a bookstore and buy it there, or you can order it on Amazon, or you could order it from ECW Press, or I was just in the UK. You could buy it at starting in November, it'll be available at bookstores in the UK, but you could get it from their website. You could order it from their websites now.
And where can everybody find you on social media?
Well, I was going to say I'm on all social media, but somebody hacked my Instagram account last week. It was my fault. I shouldn't have copied a link. And, once I clicked the link, I was dead. So I'm not on Instagram. I'm not active on Instagram currently. I can't figure out how to undo the hacking. But as of now, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. And hopefully within the next few days, I'll be back on Instagram too. Keith Elliott Greenberg. And, that's where you'll find me.
All right, Keith. Good to see you again. Thank you for all the time. Appreciate it.
Levy, it's nice to meet you, even though it's not in person.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure.
And please, next time we're in the same place, walk over to me if I don't walk over to you first.
I will, and I appreciate that. Looking forward to that.
Me too.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. Lavi, let's get to the news. What is going on? What is the latest as far as WoW? Because shockingly, ratings have come out for them.
Yes, Christmas or Hanukkah came early, depending on where someone stands. But Brandon Thurston was very kind from WrestleNomics in terms of gifting the wrestling world with these ratings. I had been alluding to it for a while. Somebody could have probably guessed that Brandon was helping to get this information. But we have the first 3 episodes now. Episode 1, 281,000 viewers. Episode 2, 273,000. Episode 3, 251,000. Now, from episode 1 to 3, that's an 11% drop, but I think it's holding up pretty well. There was so much publicity, at least mainstream, that people would be curious if you're a wrestling fan, or I imagine it's a lot of casual viewers. Apparently, 60% women are watching it, higher demos than other wrestling shows. I think it's holding up pretty well. For some reason, in The Observer, just read this morning, Meltzer was pretty bleak about the numbers, comparing it to Ring of Honor that did 400,000, which is about right. Throughout on less exposure, about half the number of stations. But WoW is a less known brand. They're just getting established, even though they're around 20 years. And they're on in worse times, late at night, middle of the night. I know that some of the Sinclair stations aired Ring of Honor at those times as well, but a lot of times they were better times, just after a highly rated high school football game, or when I was in Pennsylvania. It was on in prime time, Ring of Honor, when I went to an amusement park. So I think the numbers are pretty good. Well, we'll have to see. The proof will be how long it remains on these stations. Do any stations start dropping it? Will it be around next fall? So that's really where we'll get our answers.
What is going on with MLW? They got a big show coming up.
Yeah, so certainly the show, the Fightland show in 2300 Arena. From looking at the ticket map in terms of the bigger sections, it looks like just the first 2 or 3 rows were opened up. You could still see plenty of seats there, and behind them, it shows no tickets for sale. So you might see that in certain situations where the front seats are more expensive, so people buy the cheaper seats. I think in this case, not all of the seats were opened up. Interestingly, and I think this is something MLW does really well, they're bringing in another unit, another family unit, the Billington Bulldogs. Just read about them in the Dynamite and Davy book. So they're relatives as well. And, pardon me, I'm blanking a little bit. I'm going to say Davy Boy Smith Jr. I don't think that's exactly correct way of saying that, but the family unit. So I think that's intriguing. But also in terms of distribution model, they announced their new home with Pro Wrestling TV, right? We know MLW sort of hints at distribution deals for a while, and sometimes people are a little bit um, they're not sure where things are going, but these deals take a while. And Pro Wrestling TV isn't really the mainstream exposure that maybe some people hoped for or dreamed of. We're very proud to have Brandon Blackburn of PWTV having joined us on this podcast in the past. But as Court Bauer said in Sports Illustrated, Pro Wrestling TV is our new home for streaming. It kicks off in November with Battle Riot 4. We're bringing our weekly series Fusion, and we have some big projects coming in 2003. It's so important to be on a streaming service that is free for viewers. Now on PWTV, people will be able to access our specials and our weekly show. And it's all going to be free. We'll still have a linear presence on cable, as well as our long-term partner with beIN Sports, which we'll be sharing more about soon. We'll still have a linear presence. This is interesting. I didn't notice this start. We'll still have a linear presence on cable. So I would think that would be beIN Sports, but then it says as well as our long-term partner, beIN Sports. So we know beIN Sports, they have the digital station, but they're also on the cable station still. So I don't know if that means something more. I'm just looking into it too much. Over time, our entire catalog will be available on PWTV. Since it dates back 20 years, we'll be migrating over in batches. We'll be able to watch CM Punk from 2002, as well as Jacob Fatu and Microman from 2022. PWTV's Blackburn has plans to build this platform into a destination for wrestling fans, and he's thrilled to add MLW. The acquisition of MLW is our biggest to date. We both share the same passion of creating something of real value for the pro wrestling fan. More original content is going to arrive in 2023. So we're looking to build with MLW and help bring them to new heights. Battle Riot Show is a strong way for MLW to premiere. That show, which took place in June, features Hammerstone, Valkyrie, Richards, Tankman, Fatu, Killer Cross, and Bordeaux. We're also part of Battle Riot, and exclusive content from their MLW exit will air on PWTV. We're loading up on our episodes and making sure we give the fans everything we have. Bauer said there's a lot happening on this platform, and we're excited to be a part of it. So I think for PWTV, this is a smart move. You have content that travels well. People talk about MLW, even if their profile has lessened a little bit. And it's important for that station sort of like to remove the taste. I think they still have the content on there, but to remove the taste a little bit out of their mouths of, control your narrative. It was a very controversial promotion, or it still is. Here, even women's wrestling with Maria Kanellis didn't change the narrative. A little bit of a relationship with AAA in terms of their pay-per-views didn't change the narrative. So here I think it helps rebrand it a little bit.
The Billington Bulldogs. How interesting is that? Dynamite's, I guess, nephews and Davy Boy's cousins. That's kind of an interesting find. I feel like MLW does that more so than some other promotions. You know what I mean? Where they have, like the Von Erichs, for instance, like they'll have these wrestling lineage families come in. But that just to me, that's so interesting. The Billington Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think it's really smart because it's sort of like it threads through a narrative. It makes you like relevant in pro wrestling immediately, just because you're like, oh, okay, like you have the Wyndhams. I mean, so many like the Ortons and so on. But I think what's important is it as well, not to get too much into the creative, is like not to to have that plus, but not to like keep hammering that and overemphasize it. Sometimes like family factions, if everyone's like a legacy wrestler, nobody stands out as a legacy wrestler. So, you have to sort of like pick your spots with it. So it should be like one piece to a bigger whole.
I guess they are living in Canada instead of the UK. I guess maybe staying with some family there, but maybe they'll be booking on more shows than just MLW if they're going to move to Canada. Easier
Yeah.
access, obviously, cheaper travel to US.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, it's like a big commitment unless like they've lined up a number of dates and then um we've heard about all the work that Mass Republic has done in terms of like work visas. So like
Yep.
I have no idea about how they're doing it, but like we saw, was it a wrestler from Canada that just had his restrictions removed? He was wrestling in the U.S. and then like got hit and then couldn't come to the US to wrestle for years and years. So like there's people that come in, all the time and out and like, nobody usually notices, but if somebody does, it's an issue. Whereas on the other side, you have to go through all of the paperwork in regards to that. So I'm sure the Bulldogs have everything checked off, but logistically you just have to get that in a row and travel expenses and situating yourself in a place where there's enough wrestling. And yes, they could have done it in the UK and emerged there. There's enough wrestling, even though we talked about some of their troubles there. But I think in the US, it like takes you to another level, another stage.
What's going on with GCW? We kind of mentioned with Keith, but Moxley gone? Question mark maybe, and Nick Gage is the new world champion.
Yeah, so I'm very curious, how they did. It looked pretty packed. We had talked about that they had moved outdoors to a venue that I think allowed more space. There. So Moxley, generally was a huge draw, but of course he wouldn't have been there all the time. Nick Gage is the sort of the perennial champion. Not that he's been the champion for such huge periods of time for a while, but like he's the brand. But as has been talked about, like in terms of the contract, like it appears that he's hasn't been in the best health, especially the type of wrestling that they do. So he can't be on all of the show. So I think it's a smart move. I think for me, it could have gone either way. It would be Moxley would, leave the belt in the ring and would be done that way, or you can pass it along. I'm just sort of thinking ahead without knowing the talents like tremendously from the outside. Like, where do you go next? Do you go to Effie? Do you go to Alley Catch? Do you go? Who's the 17-year-old that's whose father was a
Nick
wrestler?
Wayne.
Nick Wayne, right? He has a lot of buzz. Like, GCW is non-traditional, right? Like, so I could see that something like that happening. So like you have to be a step ahead in that way. But really curious mostly about like, the numbers a little bit and love to have Brett back on the show sometime soon. Just looking at some of the numbers, Detroit has its so they're back in the bigger venue that we've talked about. So it seems like tickets are picking up a little bit, but the fourth row and on is still available. But that doesn't count stage seating, which had multiple rows as well. That seats are gone. So they're doing not yet as well as they've done the first two times they were there, but it's starting to pick up. Certainly better than the last time they were in Knights of Columbus, which would be expected. Columbus, Ohio, still has the third row available. In LA, of course, they have stage seating as well, but in terms of their regular rows, their second row is still available, even the day after they announced Gage was wrestling and I assume defending the title. So continued weakness in LA, but as he's talked about, LA is a good market for them, and they don't have to fill up the house, but still some time for that. The Nick Gage Invitational 7 is doing really well. The fifth row is available and GA, and in the ticket map it says almost sold out. And Wisconsin Death Trap in a small venue in Wisconsin is sold out.
So with GCW, like kind of Keith was saying too, I guess they're going to different continents and doing well. So they're doing well still. I mean, they're still kind of dominating.
Yeah, I think it's like very much market to market and draw now. So certainly like Atlantic City, huge show. Detroit, pretty good, but we're still seeing like Columbus third row. Whether it's a different uh, city in Ohio, or it's a return to Columbus. That's showing some weakness. Like LA, like I mentioned, Wisconsin is a small venue, so I'm not seeing like the huge momentum gains that we saw in the past. But as we were just talking about with Keith, like they're also returning to or continuing to expand their international footprint as well. So lots of shows all the time for them. Sometimes that, unless you have local promoters on the ground, it's hard just to promote with social media and buzz. So that might be stretching things thin with a small team there. So that's a story to continue to watch.
What is going on with AAA? Conrad Thompson, our buddy Connie, is pumping it up like crazy, and he's actually flying down to Mexico for it.
Yeah, so I saw him promoting it on social media. I've been a little bit behind in terms of listening to the podcasts, which I enjoy, but I assume he's talking about it on there. I'm not sure. But after the Flair retirement show, he came out of that really talking about the luchadors and that his parents were talking about the luchadors, which was a little over the top, but I'm sure it was true. But like, my guess and speculation would be that he has, a rights, basically a promotional deal with AAA where they're using his network and his credibility to sort of put the spotlight on Triple Mania and AAA. Like, it feels like a step removed, though. Like, it's like an advertisement almost, but not so much of like building the brand, which we've talked about. Maybe Conrad would get into more of the promotional brand, depending on how the deal is worked out. It could work out well for the parties, but I'm not sure if Conrad's audience in full is really, it's obviously AAA wants to grow that. They don't just want the lucha audience in order to grow, but it hasn't really hit for me yet. Like, you'll see it, people will like it and share it, but I don't know if it's really building momentum for Triple Mania.
So, what's going on with Forbes Mexico? They did a big piece on AAA, right?
Yeah, so I did my translation tool. I need some time. Actually, AAA put out a report, like a business report, AAA 4.0, where they really delved into their business. So hoping that Cubs fan will do the work on that and and translate the whole thing for everyone. But if not, I really have to find some time to do that. But really, some interesting tidbits that came out of this. So they're working on something, and this might be a little off from the translation and so on. Lucha Titlan, which will be a live show dinner concept, wrestling show, music. Wrestlers created specifically for this concept that will take place in Cancun in La Isla Shopping Center. So sort of like an attraction. I guess you'd imagine like LA has like certain, not LA, Las Vegas has certain shows all the time that tourists want to see. So like, it makes sense. Like, maybe tourists, like, some people are adventurous and they want to go out to like, the historic venues in Mexico, but other people want to say like, hey, I saw Lucha Libre, or I don't watch wrestling, but like, I came to Mexico, so that's something I want to check off my list. So that makes a lot of sense, but they're not investing it just on their own. They're working with Fibra Uno and Ventura Entertainment. In the translation I have, it was going to cost 200 million pesos, which looking that up, that looked like $10 million. Then as well, Dorian Roldan said, we believe that it will be an unprecedented event in the sports industry, and it has the possibility of being scalable in other places as well. So like, if this standing attraction works, you could put it in other places, not only in Mexico, but potentially the world, right? Now, in the report, they detailed other actions that the company will be betting on for the short and midterm. For example, the expansion of its portfolio of IP that ranges from fighters to products such as the aforementioned event. Another key point is the internationalization of the company, especially in the south of the US for the Hispanic audience. Sometimes, and this is my side, sometimes it sounds good, but now it's like in Arizona, and WrestleTix is reporting like 110 tickets or whatever, 300 tickets moved, right? So like, it sounds good in a report, but you have to like put support behind it. And they'll seek to have a dynamic ticket office that offers, in addition to tickets, to performances. Points in internationalization of the company, especially in the south of the U.S. with the Hispanic audience, and they'll seek to have a dynamic. Okay, so I had said that. According to data from Lucha Libre, by 2022, the company will carry out some 350 functions and its most important business divisions. Sponsors, live events, and media rights represent 33% each.
So is their business doing well enough, and are they hot right now to do all this?
It seems like, yeah, like that they're making money and they're expanding and they're building partnerships. I think they have like a lot of, or I know that they have a lot of cachet, certainly in Mexico and certain other markets in South America. Here in the US, certainly it's niche. But they have those business relationships to continue to expand and build. And I think that's a smart thing. Oftentimes we would judge it by like how many people are in the arena, or less so in Mexico, like how many pay-per-views or television rights. But here they're sort of like maturing their business in terms of sponsorships, as we've talked about for years now. Their deal with Marvel, really, Disney's Marvel, right? Like it really like legitimizes them in a big way.
Speaking of Lucha Libre, what about CMLL? What's going on with them in New Japan?
Yeah, and sort of like CMLL, of course, is the more mature business, those that they own the arenas, they do the live touring, and they're not really seemingly as ambitious in terms of like creating a worldwide brand, but they do have their relationships. So, just a little note that was made that on New Japan's YouTube, their Japanese version, which is geo blocked, otherwise, they now have content from CMLL. Cubs fan pointed out in when it was reported that they've had content from CMLL on New Japan World for some time.
And what's the latest on Impact? And how did Bound for Glory do?
Yeah, so the Observer had 650 in attendance for Bound for Glory. A correction from a reference I made last week. I was looking at the map for the tapings the day after. So they actually had, according to what they put for sale, sold out the reserve seats, and it looked like there was GA available. So 650 is in line with what you would expect for a pay-per-view. The following day is always tougher, 125 the following day. And just looking ahead, January 13th event in Center Stage, Friday the 13th. They branded it well in that way. Tickets just went on sale for that. Curiously, like usually Center Stage, right? It's a small venue. Usually they just put all the tickets on sale. So most of the map is actually GA, whereas you have just the first 3-4 rows, depending on where it is in the bowl, that are put for sale as reserve tickets. And it looked like some of the first row, a little bit of the second had sold out just within the first few hours as we record this.
I like the little tombstone, the grave or whatever, the Friday the 13th with the eye, the logo there. It's very cool stuff that they co-branded it with, obviously making it Friday the 13th esque.
Yeah, I think that's like if they can do that, and not everything lends itself to that, it just makes it like more interesting and fun. And at least on my Twitter,
Or the casket. I'm sorry, the casket. Yeah.
yeah, and at least on my Twitter, like it seems to cross over, as a lot of people seem to like horror movies and so on. So I think that's smart branding.
So are they doing okay? Because it seems like they've Tommy Dreamer working for them. They've Lance Storm. Like they have guys that, not that they're so expensive, but they're not going to be necessarily like cheap. That these are guys that have been in and around the business for 30 years plus. Bully Ray just came in. I mean, what do you think as far as like how they're doing business wise?
I think in terms of their distribution, it's mature right now, meaning that they know what they get right from their parent company. They know what budget they have from Access TV. They know what revenue they make from like a Pluto TV. They know about their international rights deal. So like it gives them a sense in terms of budget. And I think they have a sense that when they go on the road for pay-per-views, it's hundreds. They would hope for, like, I would imagine, upper hundreds. Sometimes it's mid hundreds. And then when you tape the next day, it's low hundreds. And you hope for more than 100. So I think they know what they have. And then they could build a budget from there. So when they bring, there's an exodus of 5 talents, and then 5 talents came in basically within the same show, if I understand correctly. So I don't know if they're expanding their budget, but it's more like just with moving parts. And then with their executive team, as we talked about with Sign Guy Dudley, right? Like he's not just on the books for Impact, he works for Anthem overall. So it's not Impact that has to absorb that cost in its own budget.
All right, so let's head towards the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com. And of course, Patreon, patreon.com/tmptempire. Lavi, what do you got?
Yes. So follow me on Twitter, LaVieMarg, LAVIEMARG. DMs are open if you'd like to sponsor any advertising, sponsorship availables opportunity, especially for our 100th episode. Hit us up soon if you're interested in that. But thank you to our sponsors, MKW Wrestling, Title Match Network, and we are the official business podcast of SE Scoops.
All right. Thank you, Lavi. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. And thank you, Keith. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.